Hi guys, this demo is about sanding your plaster sculpture. Sanding is kind of a tedious process. It takes time and patience and precision, but if you take the time and focus to sand your sculpture and buff it really good, the end result is going to be it's going to look very good. And it'll also help your grade because it's going to help your craftsmanship as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Here's a piece that's been carved. And if I turn it and look at it, you can see all the little bumps and stuff on it. On the little bumps and grooves and rocky areas where it's been carved with a knife. On the other hand, here's a finished sculpture that has been sanded. It's not perfect, but those grooves and bumps are gone and it looks much, much smoother. So how do we sand? Well, the first part is using some different grades of sandpaper. This one is a 220 and it's a little rougher, but it's not terribly rough. And what I'm going to do is just kind of fold my sandpaper and just start looking at an area and sanding it. You can go in little circles, back and forth, and you just sand down that surface. And you got to take away sometimes a decent amount because you're trying to get rid of grooves and bumps and little potholes and pock marks and stuff like that. So you may have to stay on one area for a while. What I recommend doing is not sanding everything all at once, going here to here to here to here to here, but just pick one little area at a time and really focus on that one area and try to get it as smooth as you can. It's really about precision. So I'm looking at that area and really trying to see if I can get all those dents and marks out of it and get it very, very smooth. So like I said, it's kind of a precision process. It's not about speed necessarily. It's more about focusing on a certain area. Sometimes little grooves and little curves, you can bend your sandpaper and just kind of get into a little area by bending it and going back and forth. You may even tear the sandpaper into smaller pieces. You can be kind of innovative in how you approach sanding. There might be some areas that are just so small and so tiny that you just can't get into those areas, and that's okay. This is trying to get it as good as we can. It's not necessarily going to be perfect, but you can get it really, really smooth with just the sandpaper. So you kind of find the way that works best for you. So what I would do is after you finish sanding the entire thing with the 220, then come in with an even smoother sandpaper. This is like 300 or something like that, and just go back over it. And the more you sand it with a finer paper, it's going to get even smoother. And some of those lines that actually come from the sandpaper are going to get smoothed out from this finer sandpaper. So yeah, just focus on an area and really try to get it as smooth as you can. If you can see any bumps, any ridges, any unsmooth areas, that's where you should keep working. Now sanding, I would say usually if you're really focusing on it, that can take you like two periods of class. So don't expect, don't come up to me after 5 minutes and say, am I done? If you're really doing it well and taking your time and focusing, it could be 2 full periods that you sand. And I'm going to be honest, it's not super duper fun, but it really pays off in making your final sculpture look much, much better. So I'm not going to sand this whole thing, obviously, in terms of not wanting to use up too much time. But I am going to talk about buffing, which is the step that you take after you sand. So I'm going to use my finished one as an example of the buffing. And what we're doing basically with buffing is we're taking a piece of cloth. It's kind of got a real fine weave to it. It's not real rough at all. And we're going to actually get it wet and then we're going to rub the surface of the sculpture with that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my cloth and I just kind of fold it around my finger, and then I'm dipping it in some water. And so now I'm actually getting the surface of my sculpture a little bit wet, and you'll see how that really smooths out. But in order for this to work, it has to be very well sanded to begin with. If it's not real well sanded, it's just going to kind of be bumpy yet kind of smooth. So anyway, I'm using that finger and I'm just carefully looking where I'm going, and I'm rubbing the surface of my sculpture. And once again, you can try little circles, just back and forth, one direction, whatever kind of works best for you. But also be really conscious of where you're working and trying to make sure that's getting as smooth as you can. That water is, what it's doing is it's kind of softening the surface of your sculpture, and so it can really smooth out at that point. Another thing you can try is just taking your finger and getting that a little wet and rubbing the surface with your finger. This is particularly nice for getting into certain areas that you might not otherwise be able to reach. So this particular person, I remember, they spent a lot of time just smoothing it out with their fingers, and it actually worked really good. So using the cloth and the water, you know, we don't want to soak your sculpture, but the surface has to be wet in order for this to work. One word of caution when you're into your buffing, you know that water is softening your sculpture a little bit, so you don't want to be pushing too hard, because a lot of thinner areas that are really nice and really pretty will break when you're buffing if you're putting too much pressure. So anyway, the end result of sanding and buffing after several classes of doing that will be a nice, smooth, finished sculpture that has just that smooth, nice look to the surface, and I think it looks really good. So I just encourage you to take your time, do your best craftsmanship, so that that's what's really going to turn out giving you a nice final product with your plaster sculpture. All right, so that's basically sanding and buffing, and that's going to be the final step that completes your plaster sculpture. Thank you.